Okay, so I guess most people here will know what I'm talking about when I mention the words operational and denotational semantics. But anyway, I will brief recapitulation of what it is. So operational semantics basically says how one term written in the syntax of the programming language generates a side effect, or what I also call behavior in my talk, and another term basically that will be the next term where it keeps going, from where it will keep executing. Denotational semantics basically tells how operations in the language operate on denotations and form new denotations. Traditionally, these have been sort of different camps in the world of semantics until Thury and Plotkin's work, which basically unified both these styles of semantics. They have done so by abstracting from the specific grammar of the language and the specific behavior of the language. They have done that using the language of category theory, and well, this is their original paper is well, I would say quite hard to read if you're not a category theorist, but fortunately there have been some Haskell implementations previously developed by Skelyov, Hutton, and Kani. But in my talk, I will be talking about well, the Coq implementation, because well, these papers that have been extending the framework that was originally presented by Thury and Plotkin are becoming increasingly complex, and even one of the papers that I've read recently by Bartek Klin, he admits that in the computation of the examples they had made a mistake in the original version that was discovered by the reviewers. So I think it is a worthwhile effort to have a formal version of this framework, which allows you not only to compute in this style, but also allows you to prove formal properties about it. So yeah, I will be talking about this theorem proof or talk, and then one of the most important things about theorem proving is that well, all the functions that you write have to terminate. So that's an important difference with the Haskell implementation. And essentially, the types that were used to develop the Haskell implementations cannot be directly carried over into Coq. So you have to, use some tricks there. So Coq is on one side a programming language, which will allow me to do computations, but on the other side, it is a theorem prover with support for dependent types, and it is precisely the dependent types that I will use as a sort of workaround for these issues that you will run into when you're trying to carry over these Haskell types. So the overview of my talk is as follows. I will start off with a simple language for streams. So basically, the language allows you to develop streams to show, well, to give an intuition of how this framework by Thury and Plotkin works. Then I will generalize it a little bit. And in the first two sections, I will be mainly using Haskell, just because I expect that the audience here is not that familiar with Coq. And in the rest, I will move on to the Coq development and start talking about it. Well, and most of it hinges basically on a structural, proper encoding of the structure of terms itself. So I will be spending some time on that. And then I will sort of give a sketch how the consistency theorem of the operational denotational semantics works. And then I will, well, give a hint about how the proof is improved to handle the GSOS format of operational rules. I will be mainly talking about a simpler format, but the consistency theorem essentially stays the same. So we'll be just talking about a simpler format and at the end mentioning the more general format for GSOS. So yeah, here's these three operational rules basically describe how three operations in my language will be forming streams. So I have an operation called lowercase a, which just outputs a capital A as a label and moves on to another A. So if I keep iteratively executing the terms that I get in this language, if I start out with an A, I basically develop a string which just has capital A's in it. And the same goes for B. and then I have another operation that allows me to build the alternation of two strings. So basically, well, you just output the letter, the label of the first string, and then continue with the other string, which is in this case y, but you basically skip the side effect of y in this case. It is a very simple way of just alternating between two strings. So normally, when you have a bunch of operational rules like these, well, these generate a transition relation between two terms and a label. And in a language like Sjaak, it is very easy to develop the same relation by just encoding it directly as an inductive data type, which the constructors correspond precisely to the operational rules. But what I will be doing is talking about co-algebras, which are a little bit different, but encode the same information. So instead of having this relation between terms and labels, I will just be talking about terms which have, well, a function which maps a term basically to a term with a side effect on it. In this case, I will be interested in, for this particular language, the side effect, which is just a label together with the term, right? So you start off with a term and you produce a label and another term. Because this language is deterministic, right? I don't have non-determinism in it. This precisely encodes that information. Okay, so what I haven't mentioned yet is this type for terms, basically, which is always built out of an application of an operation, which comes from the signature sigma, and well, it is one of those three operations, basically. So it's just a fixed point, basically, of the signature. And in the paper, I give an example that involves non-determinism, which is a bit more complicated, but I won't be talking about it in this presentation. So, yeah, how do we give this co-algebra in this case? So, well, I call this co-algebra the operational model because that's basically what it does. It gives an operational semantics, and what it does is, well, it takes an application of an operation in the language to a number of arguments, and then just tells what the side effect on the next term will be. So, in the case of the operation A, lower letter A, which, well, I call AS in this case, it produces basically the label A together with another operation AS. And for BS it's the same, and for alternation, well, what do? We recursively apply the operational model to the argument terms, and then, well, which basically corresponds to, developing the derivation of the transition, and producing, well, the lowercase L, which corresponds to that rule, and then moving on to the alternation with those two meta variables. Okay, and then the natural next step that one would want to do, given a co-algebra, would be to unfold the co-algebra to obtain a stream of labels. So that would be taking OM and just unfolding it to obtain a stream. Eventually I will be talking about a Coq formalization, so I may as well start doing this a little bit now already. It's instead of just talking about I think this is an anamorphism normally, what the language people use. I will be drawing diagrams because I have the property, so I may as well just draw the diagram that belongs to unfold here. But you have to be a little bit careful because not every functor B has a final co-algebra. So what I'm talking about out here is the final co-algebra, which has the property that any co-algebra has a unique mapping into the greatest fixed point of that functor. With that property, but you have to be a little bit careful.
What category are we in now?
Well, I will be talking about set, basically, but as long as you can just create, take the final co-algebra of the functor that you're talking about, the whole story still works. Okay, so this should be familiar. Basically, once you take a greatest fixed point, you sort of have an unfold operation that allows you to unfold this co-algebra. Yeah, and for in the case of streams, so L times X basically, and the greatest exponent of B is isomorphic streams. Yeah. Are you okay with this? Yeah. Okay. Well, like I said, I'm slightly cheating with this because I'm taking here the greatest fixed point of an arbitrary function. It does not always give a diagram like this. Okay. So that was the operational semantics. On the other hand, we have the denotational semantics, where we basically we have these denotations and we create new denotations out of them. So for AS, it's quite trivial to just you just go iteratively keep pushing A's onto the stream, and for the alternation, well, you basically start at the same thing. The next thing is, well, we make the denotational model, which basically tells how does an operation apply to these streams. Basically, yields a new stream, and that's just filling in the denotational parts right into it. And that has a dual diagram that corresponds, which basically captures the idea of compositionality of denotational semantics, which basically says that denotational semantics is the denotational semantics basically runs the model over the terms that are arguments of the operations. And what we want to do, of course, is prove the consistency of these two functions that we obtain basically. And it is not as obvious as just saying, okay, we have two unique functions, because these are only functions that are unique with respect to the property that they have. So it doesn't automatically follow yet. So the only thing that we can do at this point is just give an ad hoc proof of consistency of these two forms of semantics, and we want to do a little bit better. And on top of that, once I start talking about the equality of two streams is not the standard equality in Talk, which is syntactic, but it is by simulation that I will need. And just for that, I will also need to be general enough to treat, to take into account user-defined equalities on types. Okay, so yes, to generalize what I've shown previously, I give a semantic model, which basically encodes the operational rules, similar to the way I did it before, but with the difference that this is a recursion-free form of the encoding of the semantics, basically. So we have an operation that is applied now to basically a side effect. So I think of it as you have a number of arguments, but you take into account that all of these arguments have side effects on them, and you basically move on to a side effect on an operation. This just directly corresponds to the rules that are shown above. The typical thing that people do in the Haskell world, as I've read in many papers already, is that the terms are just the sort of least fixed point of the signature function, and you can just define it in this way, as many people must have seen it before. The problem is that you cannot do the same in Talk, because it would potentially lead to programs that would not, that would allow you to create something that runs infinitely long. And the same goes for taking the greatest fixed point of that behavior concept. So we have to do a little bit better than that in the case of Talk. And for that, I use this auxiliary type. This is a type family that encodes basically the set of natural numbers up to some finite number, which is that nat. So the fin of 2. Sorry, guys, I wrote down first, but it should have been fin 2. So this should have been fin 2. There's only two ways of making a fin 2. Is either using the constructor first with the argument 1, which creates a fin 2. All right, that's the first constructor of the indictive data type. Or it is a next applied to a first 0. So there's only two ways to create a thing which shows basically that there's two elements basically in this type. Yeah, sure.
I was kind of expecting, since you introduced this algebra, you might use the co-induction, and why you have to go to this fin.
Okay, Okay, so what I'm doing, so I'm not, this is basically about terms, so this has more to do with algebras than co-algebras, right?
He's not there yet.
Yeah, I'm not there yet. What I'm essentially doing, so you're right. This same story you could basically do for the side effects of the co-algebra, but I'm not doing that because co-algebras are, they allow. You could expect a little bit more variation there than just the syntax, and because a grammar usually has a sort of simpler structure, and that's basically what I'm trying to exploit here. So what I'm doing is basically thinking of a grammar is a bunch of I'm doing grammars without variable binding, obviously, because that's a lot simpler. You have a bunch of operations, and each of these operations has a fixed number of arguments. So that's exactly what I'm encoding here. I have a size of my signature, and each of these operations, which correspond to a fin, has a fixed hierarchy. And then, I fix the signature functor to be basically a dependent pair, which on the left side has the index basically in the signature, and on the right side a length index list basically of the arity of that symbol basically. The operation I in my signature, and this is allowed in Coq to be defined basically. So instead of keeping like before, keeping f the signature completely variable, I now sort of fix the structure a little bit further, and that will allow me to make Coq terms as well. So yeah, I briefly mentioned it before. So what I'm going to have to do is use user-defined notions of equality. So basically bar simulation is what I'm using, and for that I need to generalize things a little bit. So I'm talking about terms types which not have the standard syntactic version of equality on it, but a sort of generalized version, which is each of the set weights. So these are just, types packaged with a notion of equality and together with a proof saying that this notion of equality is an important observation. And the recent support added to Coq for type classes allows me to do fluent rewriting with these using these set words basically, and that makes proofs a lot easier. So I don't really have to show point Coq every time that which notion of equality to use. It will just allow me to do it by just saying rewrite this, rewrite that. So the diagrams that I'm presenting here, and that I will be presenting even sort of when I briefly go over the proof of consistency, is just correspond directly to rewrite steps that I'm doing in my Coq proofs. So there's one important principle for terms, which is this one basically. So I can fold over terms by telling by first saying how to treat variables and how to treat operations. So those are the k and the h. And there's only one way then to give a fold operation that makes the diagram commute. And then there's the property that sigma and t are set-wide functors, and actually t is also a set-wide monad, which are just variations of the standard notions, but I won't be talking about monads. So using this definition principle, which so you just say how the operations are going to behave and the variables are going to behave, you can now develop a more abstract operational model. So given a semantic model that I picked before, so this is a more abstract form. So everything is now parametric basically in the behavior and the signature. You basically, you get this unique operational model, so which is, this is supposed to be a co-algebra, so given a term, I need to say how this will lead to a side effect on a term. So for the variables, basically, I'm just going to, those are going to be the leaves of the derivation tree, so at that point, I'm just applying hypotheses, so that's our response to the gamma, and to make it up the right type, I just, apply, turn it into variables, basically. So I have a variable going to a variable with a side effect, but I turn it into a term. And then on the other hand, when I come across an operation on a bunch of terms, I basically apply the operational model recursively, and then finally, when I have when I've done that, I apply the semantic model to it. So this essentially corresponds to writing a functional program that builds the derivation tree of a transition. Then the next thing to do is to unfold basically a term into a stream or a whatever, going with the data type you're interested in, which was, unfolding what I did before, but now I'm calling it run. So it has this, by using unfolded automatically, it has this property. So you have an operational model and you can run it to obtain a stream essentially. On the other hand, I want to have the denotational model, which is essentially a dual version of what I've done before. So in this case, it is basically the unfold of the semantic model, and then using the definition principle for terms, I can use the denotational model to make it evaluation of the denotational semantics. Okay, and this picture basically completes it. So throwing everything together, and then at this point you just do a bunch of diagram chasing to show that run and IFL are basically the same thing. That's all reasoning, just using essentially the finality property of this thing. So basically, you say that run. That IFL has a unique defined using the unique definition property of folding, and you just show that run satisfies that same diagram, and you just use the finality property of out. If anybody's interested, I can go over it, but I don't have enough time for that. Sorry. Okay, so the GSOS format is a little bit more general. So rules, for instance, this rule that I have omitted in the previous definition is now in this semantic model had to only accepts basically rules of the type above. And in order to zip, you cannot fit the rule zip into it because zip refers to the meta variable y in this case, which is an ingoing variable. You simply do not have it in the type above because you're just talking about the side effects on a variable. You cannot talk about the variable that originally went into obtain that side effect. So we have to generalize that a little bit to be able to do that, and that's essentially what the GSOS format allows you to do. So instead of just having vx as the argument, you just you take the product basically of x and vx. So you're retaining the ingoing meta variable, and apart from that, you can make it even a little bit more general, allowing you to talk in a conclusion. Zip doesn't do that, but you may want to put a more complex term in there, and not just an operation applied to a number of variables. You can turn that basically into a semantic model which has sort of almost the same form as the one above. But in this case, you're not just distributing just two functions over each other, but the monad over a functor, and the proof basically becomes a little bit more complex, but it is still basically the same shape. So this theorem holds, and the picture, accordingly changes a little bit by just updating the types everywhere, and instead of the application, you have a join here, which has a slightly different definition, different induction principle as the one that was using application, but things work still work right the same way. So conclusions. What I've done is developed a formalized version of a denotational and operational semantics in Proc that is not only it does not only allow me to prove properties about it, but also is also executable. In contrast to work that has previously done in Proc on semantics. The consistency has been proved formally, and it enables future work basically to formalize those papers that have extended the work of Turing and Plotkin. And the most interesting one, I think, to look at next, it would be language with variable bound. And like as you already mentioned, what I have not done in this work so far is develop a general theory for the behavior, just like the terms. But in the case of behavior, things become a little bit more complicated, as you may have, things like non-determinism, which which are a little bit wilder, or probability or time, something like that. It's a little bit wilder than just a structure that you would expect from normal grammar. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Ken?
You sort of dismissed Turing's and Plotkin's approach in that paper, where they use distributive laws and bialgebras,
Right.
which gives a nice generic or general proof for this setting. Can you give the reasons why?
Well, so let me just go back real quick to this. Sorry, the semantic model, which is. Let's see. This essentially is a distributive law. Because in my proof I need the fact that it is a natural transformation, which basically says that it is a distributive law. But in their paper they...
Well, you don't use bialgebras.
Well, not explicitly, but essentially this proof, this thing here is a bialgebra, right? This happens, ON, with the property that that thing is commute, is precisely a bialgebra. I just didn't mention that explicitly. I had, in my original formalization, I did explicitly make use of bialgebras, but it makes things more complicated than I think is necessary if you are just after this proof. Because in their original paper, well, they use a joint lifting theorem to be able to prove their property, and formalizing all of that in Coq is a lot of work. So I thought, why not just try to keep it as plain and simple as possible, and just use exactly what I need for this proof. So.
Do you know our ICFP paper from last year?
No.
James and mine? Well, we basically tried to explain Plotkin and Turing's paper and give sort of a dimension what you can do with the terms and different behavior functors. So how you can capture various systems of stream equations. So you may want to look at that.
Okay. I'll have a look at it.
Any other questions?
Yes?
Your operational semantics are a small step, right?
Well, it doesn't really matter if you consider small step or big step. You could use big step just as well as small step, but the example was small step. Yeah, that's correct.
Because I didn't understand what you mean by denotation in semantics, because usually denotations have a different domain. I mean, you use the same eval and run the inverses.
So the
from
domain
operational,
is,
you usually have terms and you go to terms. For a denotational, you go to some model.
right. So the denotational, I suggest maybe that this is a denotational semantic when I speak of denotational model, but the denotational semantic itself is essentially this eval thing, which turns a term basically into a set, which is essentially the semantic domain.
So how can run go from the semantic domain to the term?
Run.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Run is obtained as from an operational model, essentially. So what I do in that case is just, go iteratively execute each step given by the operational model. So I have an operational semantics that explains to me how a term, generates a side effect and moves on to the next term. And I can just keep doing that, and that gives me an element of the semantic domain as well.
It's taking the transitive closure of the small steps, basically.
So that would give you the biggest step?
That would give you?
The biggest step?
No, that's not the same thing. When you talk about big step semantics, you essentially directly move on to sort of the last state that small step semantics would take several steps to do, but you just move on to it directly. That's not the same as just talking about a stream.
Okay, I think we need to stop there, and let's thank Ken one more time.